Thank you, Ken. Hello to the people in the library. Is that? I had a chance to look at them before I came in here, and I have to tell you, they're a better-looking group than the main. They're better dressed and they're better looking. But I'm glad that you're here too. And I can't imagine anybody wanting to sit in another room and watch me. So I'm flattered that everybody's here. It's a pleasure to be here. I came down this afternoon. I'm from South Georgia. In fact, there's some people here from my hometown, Albany. I'm old enough now that I know how to pronounce it. And we never got over as far as Pensacola. We went straight to Panama City, and that was about all the gas that we could afford. There was plenty of beer there when we got there. So I don't know this part of your beautiful state as well as I do east of here, but it's great to be here. First, Ken, where have you gone? Ken's gone back into the better-looking room. That's where he's gone. I just wanted to thank you for that nice introduction, and I appreciated your keeping it short and sweet. I'll have to tell you a story about an introduction I had one time, a long time ago. Are there any lawyers here? Don't be too embarrassed. There's one there, two lawyers there. That's three. Some people would say that's three too many, but at any rate, back when I was in Washington one time, Judge Bell, who was Attorney General of the United States and a great man from Atlanta, Georgia, called me and asked me to speak to the Young Lawyers section of the American Bar Association. And I suspect this group knows how Washington operates. All these organizations have meetings in Washington, and they have some highfalutin purpose for being there, but their real purpose for being there is to lobby the federal government for something they probably don't deserve. But it's always a measure of the importance of these organizations to have someone come and speak to them from the administration. They all want the president to come. The president seldom does those things. The vice president, he's out of the country, and Secretary of State, they work their way self down. They usually end up with a political hack like myself. And so it's not, it's not heavy lifting. What you do is you don't prepare remarks. You just get in the car and, White House limousine drives you over there. You might scribble down a couple of things on the way over. And then you get over there to the National Fertilizer Growers meeting and tell them that the president really wishes he could be here. And, feels so strongly about your issues and concerns. And then you kind of sit down. That's it. So I was, because Judge Bell is not a guy you would say no to, so I was going over to speak to the Young Lawyers section of the American Bar Association. So I got over there, and I had thought about 15 seconds about what I would say, but a young lawyer whom I had never seen before in my life stood up to introduce me. And it was immediately obvious that he had gone to an enormous amount of effort to prepare this introduction. He had talked to my mother. He had talked to a high school teacher. He had talked to a football coach. And it was kind of cute for the first 5 or 10 minutes. And then he started going through my life year by year, what I did in the 7th grade and the 8th grade. People in the audience were standing up and talking and leaving, and nobody was listening to him. This is the truth. About 25 minutes after he started this introduction, he introduced me. I stood up. I tried to tell these lawyers with a straight face how important they were to the future of our country. And I sat down. I was up for 30 seconds. But this young fella, rushed over to me after my speech. And I wanted to acknowledge the hard work that he had done. So I stuck my hand out and I said, I don't know how to thank you for that great introduction. He said, I do. I want to be a federal judge. Now, can you imagine a lawyer being that forward and present? And of course, he is a federal judge today. But so, Ken, if I could, I'd make you a federal judge for that short and sweet introduction. One more story, and then I'll tell you my story. This is. I'll let you decide whether this is true or not. We've offended the lawyers. Are there any Catholics here? Are there any Catholic lawyers here? Any Catholics? Raise your hand. Yeah, I'm not sure I'll tell that story. I growing up in South Georgia, and I know some other people here in South Georgia. I never saw a Republican or a Catholic until I was 20 years old. But I married a Catholic, so my wife allows me to tell this story. This story is about the Pope, the last Pope, not our current Pope, but the beloved John Paul. And one of his favorite things to do was to read poetry. And one Sunday afternoon in the Vatican, John Paul was in his modest little quarters in the Vatican reading a book of poetry and taking it easy. He was exhausted. He'd blessed hundreds of thousands of people that day. And he heard a knock on the door, and a very nervous Monsignor stuck his head in the door and said, Holy Father, there's a phone call for you. And the Pope said, well, so what? And the Monsignor said, well, I don't know how to tell you this, Holy Father, but the person on the phone claims to be the Lord. Well, the Pope had been trying to talk to God, for 60 years and hardly expected to get an AT&T call on a Sunday afternoon from God. So the Pope put the phone up to his ear very skeptically, but the instant he heard this booming voice on the phone, he knew that it was God calling him. And he was absolutely speechless for the first time in his life. He hemmed and hawed, and finally he just blurted out, God, why are you calling? And God said, well, I have some good news for you and some bad news for you. Which would you like first? Well, the Pope, being an optimist by nature, said, well, I'll take the good news first, Lord. And the Lord said, well, let me tell you the good news. I've looked down at this earth that I've created, and I'm very unhappy with what I see. I look in the Middle East, and I see Jews and Muslims killing each other. I look in Ireland, and Catholics and Protestants fighting and killing each other. I look in the U.S., all the religions are quarreling amongst themselves. God tells the Pope, the good news is that I've decided to start over and have one religion for the world. Well, the Pope is hearing this, and he's no dummy, and he's fast-forwarded, and he's thinking, God's called me to tell me there's going to be one religion in the world. It's going to be the Roman Catholic Church, and I'm going to be in charge. And then he said, by the way, Lord, what's the bad news? And the Lord said, I'm calling you from Salt Lake City. So my bad news is, and I've got some other cancer survivors here in this audience because I met a few of them earlier. And my bad news is I've actually had 4 cancers now. I had another chunk taken out of my head last summer. But I've had four cancers in my lifetime, and the good news is that I'm here and I'm able to tell you my story. My story starts out in 1981, after we left Washington. Some of you might say after the American people asked us to leave. I came home to Atlanta. I married this great gal named Dorothy Henry, who was from Pennsylvania, and Dorothy had knew no one in Atlanta. I mean, I had some friends there, but she knew no one in Atlanta. And she was a pediatric oncology nurse. And within a year, she went to Emory and got a graduate degree. And then she had this vision of starting a camp for children with cancer. And Ken generously gave me credit for it. It was 99% my wife. And she went out in Atlanta, and she didn't know anybody, and she convinced parents to give up their children to go to our camp, and got doctors and nurses to volunteer to give up a week of their vacation to go to camp, and raise the money and put it all together. It took her about a year, and not many people thought she could do it. It was one of the first nonprofit camps for children with cancer in the country. I can't tell you what this experience of 1 week, 2 weeks, we now have year-round activities, but when we started, we just had the weeks in the summer that were camp weeks. I can't tell you what this does to a child that has cancer. These kids that have cancer not only may be going to lose their lives, they almost always lose their hair from their chemotherapy. They usually they fall behind in school a year or two. Kids can be cruel at that age. These kids are often socially isolated in the classroom. Older, 2 or 3 years older than the kids they're with. And their problems don't even end there. when a child has cancer, usually all the love and attention and resources of that family is focused on that sick child to the exclusion of the siblings. So there are problems within the family. Oftentimes we've seen parents that have lost kids to cancer. A high number of them get divorced. So this disease just goes through the family like a tornado, wreaking havoc. Well, these kids can go off to camp, and they are nurtured by that experience in a powerful way. They may have a counselor who has lost an arm or a leg, who can still water ski or can still do the ropes course. And we've seen these children, and through the lives of these children and the experiences of these children, we've seen powerful things happen at Camp Sunshine. My favorite story about Camp Sunshine, which is always difficult for me to talk about, is about a young man named Greer. Corey came to Camp Sunshine the very first year. Corey was this big black kid. He was probably 12 years old the first year he came, probably weighed 160, 170 pounds. A good athlete, funny kid. Most of all, he was a natural leader. Wherever Corey was, that's where the action was. Corey also had a very rare tumor in his colon that he battled for several years with just massive doses of chemotherapy. The summer of Corey's 15th birthday, and after he went to Camp Sunshine, he went to Eggleston Children's Hospital, which is affiliated with Emory, to get his quarterly scans. And after the doctors looked at his scans, they pulled his parents aside and told him that this tumor that had been dormant in his abdomen for 3 years had just spread all over his body. Of course, the parents' first question is, well, what are we going to do? And the doctor said, well, we've run out of tools. We've done everything we know to do. And the parents were devastated, but they immediately tried to conspire with the doctor. They were going to try to keep this terrible news from Corey. When Corey found out he didn't have any other treatments planned, he started asking tough questions. And he asked the doctor, why aren't you treating me anymore? And finally the doctor relented and said, well, there's really nothing else we have to offer. And then Corey, this 15-year-old kid, asked this doctor the question that a lot of people with cancer ask their doctors, well, how long will I have to live? And of course the doctor, he's able to hide behind the fact that, well, I don't know, Corey, how long anybody has to live. I don't know how long you're going to have to live. Corey pushed him and pushed him and pushed him, and finally this doctor said, Corey, and this was September, said, Corey, we'll be very happy if you're alive for Thanksgiving. Well, Corey absorbed this terrible news. 15-year-old kid looks his doctor in the eye and he said, I don't care what you say, doctor. I'm going to live one more year to go back to Camp Sunshine and tell my friends goodbye. We were all devastated to hear this news about Corey, but we tried to humor him because we knew there was no way he could last a year to come back and tell everybody goodbye. 1 year later, on an athletic field that's maybe the size of a football field, try to imagine 300 or 400 kids with cancer and volunteer doctors and nurses and just other good people standing in a huge circle, holding up homemade signs celebrating Corey Greer Day. In spite of the dire prognosis of his doctors, Corey had managed to stay alive, just as he had promised, to come back and tell us goodbye. He'd been on death's doorstep at the Eggleston Children's Hospital for about a month, and we flew him out on a helicopter. The chopper appeared over the field, and all the kids started yelling and screaming, and the helicopter sat down in the middle of the field. Kids ran over and opened the door, and here was this kid who'd weighed 160 pounds, 170 pounds. It was a bag of bones. He weighed 70 or 80 pounds. Only way you knew it was Corey was the big smile on his face. Kids lifted Corey gently out of the helicopter, put him on a golf cart, followed him like he was the Pied Piper down to the mess hall, and kids sung songs and told funny stories and had cakes and drank, and then it was time to go because it was obvious that Corey was very, very weak. Kids put him back on the golf cart, took him back up to the helicopter. They gently put him back in the chopper, and the last thing he said before they closed the door, he yelled out, "I may come back next year." Everybody screamed and shouted. Chopper lifted off. The pilot did a couple of 360s. Everybody's yelling and screaming at Corey. You could see him waving out the window. And the instant the helicopter was gone, there were 300 or 400 people crying, because we knew we would not see Corey again. Corey went back to the hospital that night, had dinner with some favorite nurses and his parents, and died peacefully in his sleep. He had done exactly what he had promised. He had lived that one long year to come back and to tell us goodbye. We've seen through the lives and experiences of these children the power of the human spirit to greatly extend illness, and sometimes for kids to obtain a cure that was supposed to be impossible. Camp Sunshine has meant as much to those of us that have touched it as it has meant to these children. My dear mother used to say the Lord moves in mysterious ways, and I considered it very mysterious about a year after Corey died to find out that I had cancer. I'd gone in to see my general practitioner, who's a family friend, had done that every year for like 20 years. And he sent me over to the hospital for a chest film that he'd always done in his office. And I found that kind of unusual. And I found myself in a couple of hours sitting back in his little office, and he had this viewer behind his desk, and he had all these x-rays up there. And he was talking on the phone and was kind of in a muffled voice, and he obviously didn't want me to hear that conversation. Finally, he turned around and started talking to me in medical mumbo-jumbo, and I said, "Well, what, Richard, wait a second, this is me, Hamilton. What's wrong?" He said, "Well, I don't know how to tell you this, but," he said, "you have an abnormal chest film." And he turned and circled this area of the x-ray. He said, "You've got this mass in your chest about the size of a baseball." And I said, "My God, what is it?" And he said, "Well, we don't know what it is, and we will not know for sure until we do a biopsy." Well, I asked that question 3 or 4 different ways, trying to get to the truth, and he never would tell me. And finally I said, "Well, Richard, is there a chance this is cancer?" And he said, "Hamilton, from the looks of it on this x-ray, the radiologist thinks that it probably is." Well, I was devastated and scared to death. And as I drove home that day to see my wife and my little boy, who was about 8 months old at the time, I wondered if I would live to see him grow up or even to reach his first birthday. I went in the hospital the next day and had the biopsy, which really was no big deal. But I had to wait back then 3 days for the pathologist to look at it and write a report. Made no easier due to the fact that my mother and my sister and my wife took turns crying out loud while I was laying there. So on the 3rd day, these doctors walk in, and one of them steps forward and tells me that I have something called diffuse histiocytic lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and talks about it. And I'll mention that I'll always believe that I got that from being in Vietnam. I was in an area that was just flooded with Agent Orange, and there have been a lot of veterans that came back 10, 15, 20 years later that got this exact kind of lymphoma. So I knew enough from Camp Sunshine. I knew the questions to ask, and I said, "Well, okay, that's what it is. What are we going to do about it?" The doctor stepped forward and he said, "Oh, we've got, we're going to put you on this chemotherapy, and we're going to hit you pretty hard, but, you've got a good chance." What's a good chance? "Oh, we get about 50% of our people into remission." I said, "Okay, but now how many of those people hold that remission, for 5 years? That's the ultimate test." Another guy said, "Well, about 40 or 50% of them hold their remission," even though I went to the University of Georgia. And when I went, if you could stand up at the registration desk, they'd let you in. You actually have to have good grades now. But even though I went to the University of Georgia back then, I could calculate that I had about a 20% chance of living for 5 years, which at age, I'm trying to think how old I was, in 39 didn't seem too great. So I threw everybody out of the room. I was barely civil to my mother and my wife. I just wanted to be alone. I didn't want to see anybody. I was scared to death. I laid there and just kind of wallowed in my self-pity all day. Talked to Dorothy a few times, but I just wanted to be left alone. I was scared. I thought I was going to die. Next morning, word had gotten around among my friends that I had this challenge, and a friend of mine who was a doctor flew in to see me from Savannah, Georgia. And he found me laying there feeling sorry for myself. He said, "You know what you've got to do, don't you?" And I said, "No." He said, "You've got to get out of that bed, and you've got to get involved in these decisions they're going to make." And I said, "Albert, you don't know what's happened to me. They've told me I've got about a 50% chance of going into remission, and even if I go into remission, I've got only about half of those people hold that remission." I said, I'm worried about dying. He said, "Hamilton, you didn't listen to me." He said, "Who has a greater stake in the decisions that are going to be made about your life than you do?" The instant he said that, it hit me like a thunderbolt. And from that point on, I spent every ounce of my physical and mental and emotional energy, spiritual energy, trying to understand this disease that I had and trying to beat it. I paid an orderly $20 that night to sneak me out of the room and take me down to the hospital library. And I started reading all these medical journals about non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and the kind that I had, diffuse histiocytic lymphoma. And some of the books were scary. They were 5 or 10 years old, and they just said it's an incurable form of lymphoma. But then as I started reading magazines and quarterly publications, I didn't understand a lot of what it said, but I could see that this was a disease in which science was investing money and making progress. I got excited, and I got on the phone the next morning with the support of my doctors, and I called all over the place. Called Canada. I called a doctor down in Australia. I finally found a program at the National Cancer Institute in Bethesda, Maryland. And when I talked to the doctor, this program was only 2 or 3 years old, but they were getting about 60 or 70% of their patients into remission. And at that point, 70 or 80% of those people were holding that remission. Well, there's a hell of a lot of difference in having a 20% chance of living and a 50% chance of living, or 40 or 50% chance of living. So I moved my family, Dorothy and my little boy. We moved up to Bethesda, and I went through 6 or 7 months of chemotherapy. It wasn't easy. I had 6 different agents that I took. I took prednisone. I was bloated from the prednisone. I didn't have a hair on my body from the chemo. Some mornings when I'd get up out of bed, I would be so weak and tired that Dorothy would push me out of the bed on the floor to get me started. But she did that this morning, so some things hadn't changed. But no matter how tired and how bad I felt, every day I would get up and I would try to work. I would try to walk. Sometimes I would jog. I had this angel, Corey Greer, on my shoulder. And this 15-year-old kid inspired me to think that I could be cured of this cancer. And I was absolutely determined that I was not going to have this cancer totally define and dominate my life. I was one of the lucky ones. This mass in my chest just disappeared after a couple of cycles of chemo. It didn't mean I was cured, but when you're having a dramatic reaction to chemotherapy, it often means that you're going to get a good remission. So this thing just disappeared in my chest, and I had to finish my 6 or 7 months of chemotherapy, but I knew that I had a good chance of beating this cancer. It was not all good news. My doctors told me that I would be infertile and we could not have additional children. I'd always wanted 3 or 4 kids. Dorothy, being a Catholic, had wanted 15 or 20. But, sorry Catholics. But I had to focus on the blessing that we received, and the possibility, at least, that I could live long enough to see my little boy grow up. Almost 10 years from the date of that first diagnosis, I found myself sitting on the back porch of this big house that we used to rent on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Dorothy's family is from Pennsylvania and Jersey, and of course we're from Atlanta. And we used to meet there for about 12 years, halfway between, rent this big house, and create wonderful memories of our family for our children. Now, I'll have to tell you this, since Dorothy's not here, her family never paid their fair share. 3 or 4 of us, about 25 or 30 of them, split it right down the middle. We rented a house that slept 25, and there were about 40 of us would stay there, right on the beach. And in the morning when you got up to get your coffee, you'd have to step over nieces and nephews, and there were some in-laws that you wanted to step on, but you usually didn't. But this was how we spent 12 years from 82, 83 through 97. This particular day, I was sitting out on the back porch watching the kids in the surf, and there must have been 15, 20 cousins playing, including my own 3 kids. In spite of the predictions of the doctors at NCI, Dorothy and I had a second child, Kathleen, and a third child, Alexander. Now, I'll have to tell you, particularly since I'm at a scientific institute, Ken, Dr. Ken, I have no idea where in the hell these last 2 kids came from. Because I'm supposed to be infertile. In our parents' days, they probably would have said they look like the mailman. Today they would say they look like the FedEx man or even the FedEx woman. But somehow Dorothy and I had two additional children. And as I was sitting there watching the kids play on the beach, I was waiting for a phone call from my doctor. 4 or 5 days before I went on vacation, I'd gone in for another one of these annual physical exams, and a couple of days after I'd had the exam, the nurse called. And I've learned over time that when the nurse calls, that's a good thing. It's when the doctor calls that you're in trouble. So I was just glad to get a call from a nurse, and she went over my lipid profile and treadmill and all this. I was particularly interested in my PSA, which I hope all you men know is a marker for prostate cancer. I have prostate cancer all over my family. My father died of prostate cancer. He had 3 brothers. 2 of them had prostate cancer. My mother, I was about to tell you my mother died of prostate cancer. That's how bad it was in my family. My mother had prostate cancer. My mother actually died of lung cancer, bless her heart, but her father had died of prostate cancer. And she had 2 brothers, one of them died of prostate cancer. So I had prostate cancer on both sides of my family. So I had been watching my prostate very, very closely for years. And when I say that, I don't mean literally. I hope you enjoyed those hors d'oeuvres in there as I taught you about my prostate here. I'm not sure how you'd watch your prostate, but I don't think you'd want to if you could. But let's just say I've been keeping up with my prostate closely, not watching it. So I asked this nurse, well, what was my PSA? She said, well, it's normal. I said, well, that's great. Give me the specific value. She said, well, it's a 3.9. And I said, well, that's up from last year. She said, well, yeah, it is. And we went back, and my PSA had been 2.4, 2.5, 2.4 for 10 years, and that's 3.9. And I said to the nurse, I said, that's strange. Should we do something? She said, oh, you're just a worrier because you've had cancer before. Come back next year, and we'll check it again. Not me. This is the 90s. We got the internet. I go on the internet that night, and I find that over the years of doing this test, our doctors and scientists have found that the velocity or the movement of the PSA is just as important as the actual number. And that any increase in your PSA of over 0.75 in a year should be investigated. Well, hell, mine had gone up almost a 1.5 in 1 year. So I got on the phone and called a urologist the next day, and he said, well, you're not, with your family history, you're not crazy. I'm sure you're okay, but come in and we'll check it out. So I went in and he did something called a DRE, which needs no more explanation, I hope. And I said, as long as you're up there, and I said, why don't you take some samples? So he took 8 samples of my prostate and told me the scan looked okay and the DRE was okay. But he took 8 samples of my prostate and called me 4 or 5 days later when I was at the beach sitting on the porch watching my kids and told me I had prostate cancer. Well, this was not good news, but I didn't go into free fall like I did for the first cancer. I remembered what my doctor friend told me. I remember my experience from Camp Sunshine and from my first cancer, and I still had Corey Greer sitting on my shoulder. I studied all of the options, medical options available to men that have prostate cancer. And just as is the case with women that have breast cancer, there have been so many advances. There's so many options. It can almost be confusing for those of us that are consumers. But because we'd been aggressive and because we'd found this prostate cancer very early, the chances were overwhelming that it was confined to my prostate. So I gravitated toward the surgery, which is a difficult surgery because they cut you open in the middle to get to the back, and then when they get to the back, they have to lift these little nerves off of your prostate that control your continence and your sexual function. So it's major surgery, but it's also very delicate surgery. But for me, I just wanted the damn thing out of there. And I had remembered seeing a little bone scan of my father when he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. No PSA back then. When he was diagnosed, he had metastatic lesions up and down his body. His body looked like his bones looked like a Christmas tree. He had like 30 or 40 metastases all over. I just wanted the thing out of there, so I decided to have the surgery. I was devastated when my surgeon told me that after you do this biopsy and take all of these samples, the prostate is left swollen, and you want it to kind of calm down and return to normal size before you perform this delicate surgery. So I had to wait for 30 or 40 days for this surgery, and I knew I had this cancer inside of me growing. And I was scared to death that just one cell was going to escape, move somewhere in my body, and kill me just like it had my dear father. Well, word got around I was having another bout with cancer, and a friend of mine who's a great molecular biologist at Dana-Farber, which is associated with Harvard and Mass General, sent me an abstract, a scientific abstract about green tea. And there are whole areas of Asia where there are very low rates of prostate cancer, and there's some belief that it's due to properties in green tea that suppress the growth of cancer. Well, I looked at it and I found it kind of interesting. I told a few friends about it. 2 or 3 days later, the FedEx man rings the door, delivers 100 pounds of green tea from a friend of mine. And Steve Powell's here somewhere. It was Tom Beard is the one that sent that to me, Steve. So I got 100 pounds of green tea, and I've got this abstract, and I said, and I've been hearing some stories about this surgery. That didn't sound too good, so I said, I'm just going to get this green tea, and I'm going to drown this prostate cancer and not have to have this damn surgery. So I decided I better read this abstract, this medical abstract, kind of carefully, and I was disappointed to find that the subjects in the abstract were rats. And then when I extrapolated how much green tea I'd have to drink to get the same benefit as the rat, it was about 14 or 15 gallons a day. And it's hard to drink 1 cup of green tea. So I decided I better go and have that surgery. But for those 40 days that I was waiting, every day I would choke down 4 or 5 cups of green tea, and at least I felt like I was doing something to fight that cancer. Now, I was not being passive. I was fighting that cancer. My surgeon requires the patient and the spouse to come in the day before the surgery. So Dorothy went in to see him, and he looked at me. First thing he said was he talked about the surgery, told us how he would do it. Then he said, now, I'm obligated to tell you this, Hamilton. There's a chance you'll be incontinent after this surgery. He said, you're in pretty good shape. I don't think you will be. You're a young man to have this surgery. But he said, there's a chance you'll be incontinent. I said, I understand, doctor. He looked at Dorothy and he told Dorothy, he said, Dorothy, there's a chance that Hamilton will be impotent after this surgery. Dorothy looked right back and she said, that would not be a change in his current condition. So with that kind of loving support from my wife, we went into surgery the next day, and on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being terrible, it was a 2 or 3. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't terrible. And 2 or 3 days after the surgery, the doctor marched in and told me that the margins were good. He was almost sure that it was confined to my prostate. I'd have to be checked, and I'm still checked twice a year. But he thought the prognosis was good. After getting that good news, I did ask him, did my prostate have even the slightest tint of green? And he didn't even respond. He just walked out of the room. I was worried when I got home. After you have prostate cancer, you have to carry a catheter, wear a catheter for about 30 days. I was worried about what my little boy Alex, who was just 4 at the time, would think of me lugging this thing around. He went to kindergarten the next day and stood up at sharing period and said, Daddy's gone on a trip and gotten a TT bag, which is a pretty good description of a catheter. About a week after I got home, my scientist at Dana-Farber that had sent me the green tea abstract sent me a note informing me that I'd been drinking the wrong kind of green tea. But at this point, I'm not worried because the prostate cancer is gone, I think, forever. And I have another chance to live a full life. Well, I don't want to take up all of our time, so I'll run through these last couple of cancers more quickly. I grew up in South Georgia with some of these ladies here from South Georgia that look a lot younger and better than I do. And I was a lifeguard for 7 years at the Elks Club pool. And I don't know what you did when you were growing up, particularly those of you that lived on the beach, but we used to put iodine and baby oil and smear it all over us. And so I baked my body for about 8 years growing up, and 30 years later I found out I had melanoma. But found it a annual exam, easily removed. Then I had another separate skin cancer, not a melanoma, another skin cancer last year. What have I learned about life and cancer and myself from these experiences? Well, I've learned a lot of things. First, a practical lesson. Have your annual checkups. Each of my 4 cancers were found by a good family doctor at an annual physical exam. I did those every year religiously, and if I had waited another 6 months or another year, certainly with my lymphoma and probably with my prostate cancer, I'm not sure I'd be here. So you can't take care of your family and those who love you and depend on you if you don't first take care of yourself. And I don't know if there are any doctors or nurses here, but my experience has been that our friends in the health profession are the worst about taking care of themselves. So I hope if you're here, I hope you'll practice what you preach to all of us, because you're important to all of us. Secondly, I've learned that we are having an epidemic of cancer in this country. That's not a term I use lightly. By the year 2010, the American Association of Cancer Researchers projects that 50% of all people living in this country 4 years from now will have cancer in their lifetime. Why? Decreases in mortality from other diseases. Death from heart attack and stroke is down 25% in the last decade. We're making progress in treating and managing diseases that in the past were fatal. My daughter has juvenile diabetes, managed carefully, as she should have a full life. So there are more and more of us living to an older and older age, and cancer is generally a disease of age. So what are we doing about this problem? It takes a long time to take a discovery from the lab and turn it into a product. And that's what I do, frankly, in my business life. I'm involved in a lot of biotech startup companies. It takes a long time, a lot of money. If 1 out of 4 or 5 is successful, you're very lucky. So government has been one of the mainstays for cancer research funding. How much are we spending as a nation on cancer research funding? Out of every $10 that you and I send Uncle Sam, we're spending about 7 cents. So we're spending 0.07 of our federal budget on a disease that's going to strike half of us. Is that enough? You won't think so when it strikes you or someone you love or some family member, a neighbor, or a friend at work. So use your voices whenever you have a chance to advocate the increase in research funding for cancer and all diseases. Secondly, I've learned a lot about myself through this experience. I never want to lose the fear of death and the ironic blessing that cancer has given to my own life. Because my life has never seemed more worth living than at those times that I was fighting for it. There have been very few times in the last 20 years when I was not either getting over a cancer treatment or still dealing with one or dealing with a new one. And it's been an ironic blessing in my life that has taught me those things that are most important. There's nowhere in recorded history that anybody ever said on their deathbed, I wished I'd spent more time at the office. And there are a hell of a lot of people that said, I wished I had known my son better. I wish I had made up with that neighbor that I fell out with. I wished I had made more of an effort to get along with this guy at the office. So cancer in my life has focused me in a powerful way on those things that are most important. That is not to suggest that I have this all figured out. I have the same pressures and tensions in my life between trying to take care of my family and trying to work hard and trying to be a good citizen. And so I'm not suggesting to you that I've mastered this mystery of life and how to live life, but it's given me an ironic blessing by bringing into sharp relief over a long period of time those things that are most important. I speak around the country some, and I wrote this book, and people seek me out. Cancer patients seek me out oftentimes, and I think they think because they know I've had 3 or 4 cancers that I've got some kind of secret, and I really don't. I've had good doctors. I've been diagnosed early. I've become involved in my care, and I don't try to tell patients what to do, whether they should have X or Y surgery or this. I just tell them the questions to ask. I tell them to be an active partner with their medical team in making these decisions. So usually these encounters I have with cancer patients, they last, there's a 5-minute, 10-minute phone call, and maybe I'll hear from them 2 or 3 months later. They'll call me or drop me a card. Sometimes I'll never hear from them. I don't know if they've made it or not. But there was one guy a few years ago, before I wrote my book, in California, who called me, and we had kids about the same age, and we had common interest, and we just kind of clicked on the phone, and so we started talking back and forth to each other every couple of weeks informally. I mean, it wasn't on my calendar, but I would call him, and then sometimes he would call me, and we just went back and forth. This young man had a glioblastoma, which is a terrible brain tumor, and tough one to beat. Really a tough cancer. I realized one day that I hadn't heard from him in 3 or 4 weeks, and I said, "Oh my gosh, something must be wrong. I've been working hard." And I said, "I better call him." And I called him, and I was so glad to hear that familiar voice on the phone. And I said, "Well, how you doing?" He said, "I'm fine." He said, we're out in the backyard and we're cooking burgers and the kids are playing. And I said, "Sounds like you're having a good day." He said, "Hamilton," he said, "there's no such thing as a bad day. He said, I went in to see my doctor about a week ago. He told me I had about 2 more months to live. Well, I thought about how good it would be if we could all incorporate that attitude into our own lives. If we could really think about life not in terms of decades or years or months, but days. I mean, what would we do if we had 30 days or 90 days or 150 days left? I suspect we would do the things that are the most important to me. So after my first cancer, I felt lucky to be alive. After cancers 2, 3, and 4, everything is special. Time with my kids, being here with you, driving down on the beach today and seeing the beautiful water. I look forward to the rest of my life, which is a life that I promise you I do not take for granted. Finally, 2 things. My friend Steve Powell is here somewhere. He ought to not be in the better-looking room. He ought to be in here with this kind of average-looking crowd here. But I owe Steve a big thank you for introducing me to the Institute here and to Ken. And I just wonder if the community here appreciates what a jewel you have here in the work of this Institute. I frankly had never heard of it. Steve started telling me about it, and Ken and I connected on phone and sent me some materials, and the things they're doing here are absolutely amazing and will improve life for many, many people. So I suppose one of the things I want to do while I'm here is to acknowledge the work of the Institute, and the work of the staff, the work of the community, which I know gives it your enthusiastic support. And I want to thank Ken and his team. I'm only alive today because of science and the progress that we've made. When Dorothy started Camp Sunshine, we used to lose about 1/3 of our kids. And today we lose maybe 10%. Losing one is terrible. But science has the potential of changing the world and making our lives better. And I'm so honored to be here tonight to be part of this lecture series at the Institute. Ken and staff, I appreciate your hosting me here, and I appreciate your turning out to listen.